They laughed at the obese widow, until the brave knight said, "She's mine now." The dusty market square falls silent. A widow, mocked for her size and scorned by every tongue in town, lowers her eyes as cruel laughter rings out. Then boots strike the cobblestones, steel glints in the sun, and a knight's voice thunders across the crowd. She's mine now. But what begins as a bold defense hides a deeper danger. Behind the castle doors, greedy lords whisper of stolen land and a secret deed that could topple the baron's power. The widow, once dismissed as worthless, now holds the key to the fate of an entire principality. As jealous nobles whisper witchcraft and betrayal strikes from the very blood she trusted most, the question hangs heavy in the air like church bells at midnight. Will the knight's vow save her from ruin, or drag them both into the flames of scandal and destruction? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the market square as merchants called their wares and peasants haggled over prices. The cobblestones echoed with the clatter of wooden wheels, the flutter of chickens, and the bleating of sheep being led to sale. Frau Anneliese Bauer walked carefully through the bustling crowd, her warm basket heavy with coins she had counted 3 times before leaving her mill. Her plain brown dress and sturdy apron marked her as a working widow, and she kept her eyes down, trying to ignore the sideways glances and whispers that followed her path. A group of young women in their best market-day dresses tittered behind their hands as she passed. "Look how she waddles like a fat duck," one whispered, loud enough to be heard. "Small wonder she never remarried," another added with a cruel laugh. Anneliese's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin and continued toward the tax collector's stand. The coins in her basket represented months of honest work at the mill, and she would not let their mockery stop her from paying her dues. Herr Kappel sat at his wooden table like a spider in wait, his thin fingers drumming on the worn surface. As she approached, his lips curled into a sneer as he saw who stood before him. "Ah, the widow Bauer graces us with her presence," he announced loudly, drawing more attention to her. "Come to pay what you owe, or beg for more time like the rest of the rabble?" "I have my payment in full, Herr Kappel," Anneliese said quietly, reaching into her basket. "Careful now," Kappel called out to the gathering crowd. "The widow is as unwanted as the scraps left to swine, but she thinks to conduct business like a proper merchant." Laughter rippled through the market square. Anneliese's hands trembled as she counted out the coins, each clink on the wooden table, marking another moment of humiliation. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The crowd's attention suddenly shifted, and a hush fell over the square. Through the throng came a tall figure in polished armor, though the metal showed the wear of long campaigns. Sir Matthias von Falkenhayn moved with the quiet authority of nobility, yet his face bore the weariness of one who had seen too much of the world's cruelty. His sharp eyes took in the scene the sneering tax collector, the laughing crowd, and the proud but trembling widow trying to maintain her dignity. Something in his expression hardened as Kappel opened his mouth for another barb. "Perhaps," Kappel drawled, "we should charge extra for taking up so much space in the square. She is mine now." Sir Matthias's voice cut through the market like a sword stroke. The words, spoken with quiet intensity, brought instant silence. Even the chickens seemed to stop their clucking. Anneliese's head snapped up, her face flushing deeper as she stared at the knight in shock. Herr Kappel's mouth opened and closed like a fish on land, no sound emerging. The crowd began to shift. Uncomfortably, whispers replacing laughter. A nobleman claiming a common widow? It was unheard of, scandalous even. Yet none dared question a knight of Sir Matthias's reputation. Anneliese gathered her basket with trembling hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Without a word, she turned and hurried away from the tax collector's table, her skirts swishing against the cobblestones as she fled the scene of her humiliation or rescue. She wasn't sure which thought Sir Matthias watched her retreat, his face troubled beneath its stern composure. He had acted on instinct, unable to bear the cruelty being heaped upon an innocent woman. But now, standing in the slowly dispersing market square, he realized he had set something in motion that neither of them might be prepared to face. The whispers followed both of them, the widow rushing home to her mill, and the knight who had claimed her before all witnesses. The morning sun continued its climb over the market square, but the day had changed for them both in ways neither could have predicted. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Annalise's modest cottage beside the watermill. The familiar creak of the great wheel brought little comfort today as she approached the door, her mind still spinning from the morning's events in the marketplace. Before she could reach for her key, Frau Gerda's round figure appeared from behind a flowering rosebush. "Child, the whole town speaks of nothing else." Frau Gerda's weather-worn face creased with concern. "A knight claiming you before all?" "'Tis. Bound to set every tongue wagging from here to the church steps." Annalise sighed, adjusting her basket. "Please, Frau Gerda, I wish only to forget this day." "Forget? When Sir Matthias von Falkenhayn himself declared you his? The same man who led charges against the French?" Frau Gerda shook her head. "Mark my words, this will bring more gossip than your bread brings customers." The distant thunder of hoofbeats made both women turn. Annalise's heart jumped as a magnificent bay stallion came into view, its rider's armor catching the dying sunlight. Sir Matthias drew his mount to a halt before her door, dismounting with practiced grace despite his heavy gear. "Frau Bauer." He bowed formally, one hand resting on his sword hilt. "I pray you will grant me a moment of your time." Frau Gerda's eyes widened, and she retreated just far enough to maintain propriety while still hearing every word. Annalise squared her shoulders, lifting her chin despite the heat in her cheeks. "Sir Matthias, I had not expected to see you again so soon." I could not leave matters as they stood in the marketplace. His voice was deep but gentle, like distant summer thunder. "I must assure you my words were not meant in mockery. I could not stand idle while Herr Kappel showed such cruelty to a lady of your dignity." "A lady?" Annalise's laugh held no mirth. "Sir, I am a miller's widow, nothing more. I need no knightly rescue, however well intended. Your gesture was—" She paused, searching for words that wouldn't offend nobility. "Kind, but unnecessary. You mistake me, Frau Bauer." Matthias took a step closer, his expression earnest. "I spoke not from pity, but from admiration. I have seen how you carry yourself, how you treat others with kindness, despite their scorn. Such grace is rare in any station." Annalise's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her basket tighter. "Your words are generous, sir, but I have bread to bake and a mill to mind. I cannot afford to encourage gossip, even from one such as yourself." The sun had nearly set when Matthias made his way through the torchlit corridors of the keep later that evening. He had hoped to speak with the castle steward about securing proper lodgings, but voices from the baron's council chamber caught his attention. He slowed his steps, years of battlefield caution making his footfall silent. "The widow grows more troublesome by the day." Baron Heinrich's voice dripped with disdain. "These common folk forget their place too easily." "Indeed, your lordship." Herr Kappel's oily tone made Matthias's skin crawl. "But once she fades into obscurity, the Bauer lands will be ripe for claiming. That pasturage alone would fetch a fine price from the Merchants' Guild." "And you are certain of the deed's location?" "Among her husband's papers, my lord. The fool woman hasn't even looked through them since his death. Once we have that document, nothing can stop us from taking everything." Matthias's hand tightened on his sword hilt until his knuckles whitened. He forced himself to walk past, maintaining his measured pace until he reached the courtyard. The night air did little to cool his anger as he mounted his horse as he rode. Through the darkened streets, his mind raced. The widow clearly wanted no part of his protection, yet honor demanded he act. The Baron's scheme would strip her of everything: her home, her livelihood, her dignity. But interfering meant risking his position, perhaps even his knighthood. The stars emerged one by one as Matthias urged his mount toward the town gates. Doubt gnawed at him like winter wolves, yet he knew he could not stand idle. Whatever the cost, he would find a way to shield Anneliese from the storm gathering around her. Dawn broke over the sleepy town, its pale light filtering through the small windows of Anneliese's cottage. Inside, the rhythmic sound of dough being kneaded filled the cozy kitchen. Her strong hands worked the bread with practiced skill, each push and fold a familiar comfort after years of baking for the village. "Did you hear?" A shrill voice drifted through the open window. Sir Matthias von Falkenhayn himself, claiming the miller's widow. "Aye," another servant answered, their shadows moving across Anneliese's windowsill as they paused to gossip. What could a noble knight want with such as her? Anneliese's hands stilled in the dough, her cheeks burning. The voices continued, unaware of her presence just inside. "Perhaps he lost his wits in the war," one suggested with a laugh. "Or maybe there's truth to the whispers about her inherited lands, ... A firm knock at the door made Anneliese jump. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and opened it to find Sir Matthias standing there, his expression grave beneath the morning sun. "Frau Bauer," he said quietly, bowing. "I must speak with you on an urgent matter." She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. "I have bread in the making, sir. This cannot wait." His eyes searched the room. "Your husband's papers. Where did he keep them?" Anneliese frowned. "In his chest, but I haven't opened it since ... She trailed off, pain flickering across her face. "Please," Matthias urged gently. "There may be something of great importance within." With reluctant steps, she led him to the bedroom where a wooden chest sat beneath the window. Dust had settled on its lid. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it, revealing neatly bundled papers within. Together, they searched through contracts and letters until Matthias spotted a sealed packet. "This," he said, holding it carefully. "This is what they seek." Anneliese broke the seal and unfolded the document. Her eyes widened as she read. "The pasture land deed? But why would anyone?" "The Baron means to plant vineyards," Matthias explained. "Those fields feed half the town's herds. Without them ... The farmers would have nowhere to graze their animals," she finished, sinking into a chair. "But what does it matter? I am just a widow. A woman's property becomes her husband's, and I have no son to defend me." Her voice caught. "The Baron will take what he wishes." Matthias knelt before her chair, his eyes intense. "You are more than just a widow, Frau Bauer. You have strength, dignity, and right on your side. The law protects your claim to these lands, and now you have me to stand with you." The evening bells began to toll, their deep resonance calling the faithful to vespers. Anneliese clutched the deed to her chest, then moved purposefully to the hearth. With trembling fingers, she lifted a loose stone and tucked the precious document into the hidden space beneath. "I cannot ask you to risk yourself in this," she whispered, replacing the stone. "The Baron's influence reaches far." Matthias stood tall, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "You need not ask. I give you my solemn vow. I shall stand by your side in this fight, come what may." As he turned to leave, the last rays of sunlight caught his profile, casting him in gold. For a moment, Anneliese saw not just a knight, but a man of honor whose word meant everything. The door closed softly behind him, leaving her alone with the weight of both danger and hope pressing upon her heart. The Vespers bells continued there. Evening song, marking the end of another day, though Annalise knew nothing would ever be quite the same again. The stone church stood quiet in the misty Sunday morning, its weathered walls gathering the faithful as bells tolled across the town. Inside, golden candlelight flickered against stained glass, casting colored shadows across worn wooden pews. Annalise sat among the other common women, her hands folded neatly in her lap as whispers rustled like autumn leaves around her. "There he is, the noble Sir Matthias," someone breathed, as the knight took his place among the gentry near the front. Though Annalise kept her eyes fixed forward, she could feel the weight of stares shifting between them like a pendulum. "They say he visits her cottage," came another whisper. "Shameless, truly shameless," responded an older woman, her voice thick with disapproval. The priest's Latin prayers filled the vaulted ceiling, but the gossip continued to slip between the sacred. Words like water through stones. Annalise closed her eyes, trying to focus on the familiar rhythm of the Mass. She could see Matthias' broad shoulders ahead, straight and steady as a soldier's, never turning despite the murmurs. When the service ended and the congregation began to file out, Matthias did something unprecedented. Instead of joining the other nobles in their carriages, he strode purposefully through the crowd toward Annalise. The whispers grew to a steady hum of shocked commentary. "Frau Bauer," he said, bowing with perfect courtesy, "might I escort you home?" Annalise felt her cheeks warm as every eye in the churchyard turned to them. "Sir Matthias, there is no need. I insist," he said, offering his arm with such genuine warmth that she found herself taking it despite her better judgment. They walked through the town square together, past gaping merchants and stunned housewives. Matthias seemed utterly unconcerned with the sensation they caused, speaking easily about the weather and the morning sermon in the days that followed. He began appearing regularly at her cottage, always with some reasonable excuse. One day, he needed help reviewing accounts from his estate. The next, he was simply passing by and noticed her garden looked particularly fine. "You have quite a gift with numbers, Frau Bauer," he remarked one afternoon, genuinely impressed as she helped him sort through his ledgers. "And such patience for detail. A miller's wife must keep careful accounts," she replied modestly, though pleasure at his praise warmed her voice. Every measure of grain matters to someone's table. As they worked together, local children began appearing at her door, drawn by the smell of fresh bread. Matthias watched as Annalise dealt with each small visitor, never turning any away empty-handed. "But, Frau Bauer," he said after she gave a particularly large piece to a thin girl with patched clothes, "surely you cannot spare so much." "I cannot spare it?" Annalise smiled gently. "Look at her arm, Sir Matthias. She needs it far more than the first. Besides," she added practically, "her mother does my washing. We help each other as we can." Matthias fell silent, watching as she wrapped an extra roll in a clean cloth for the child to take home. He had seen grand ladies make elaborate shows of charity at court, but this quiet, constant kindness touched him deeply. The afternoon light was fading when Matthias finally gathered his papers to leave. "You have been most helpful, Frau Bauer. Might I call again tomorrow? These accounts still need attention." "If you wish, Sir Matthias," she answered carefully, though her heart lifted at the prospect. After he had gone, Annalise stood at her window, watching his tall figure disappear down the lane. A small smile played at her lips before she caught herself and pressed them firmly together. "Foolish woman," she whispered to herself, turning back to her evening tasks. "His kindness is mere friendship, nothing more. Such attention from a knight cannot last." But as she moved about her cottage, lighting candles against the gathering dusk, the smile kept returning, quiet and private as a secret prayer. Baroness Hildegard paced the polished floors of the great hall, her silk skirts rustling with each sharp turn. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching the gems at her throat, but her face remained darkened by fury. A servant trembled. Nearby, having just delivered news of Sir Matthias escorting the widow Bauer from church again. That common miller's wife, Hildegard spat, her fingers clenching around her fan. She who should be content with her bread and flour now aims above her station. The Baroness turned to her circle of noble ladies, who huddled close like eager birds awaiting crumbs of gossip. "Have you not noticed?" Hildegard's voice dropped to a knowing whisper. "How Sir Matthias changed since returning from campaign. How quickly he fell under her spell?" She paused meaningfully. "They say she keeps strange herbs in her garden. And have you seen how children flock to her door, bewitched by her sweetmeats?" The ladies gasped appropriately, fans fluttering like nervous wings. One crossed herself, murmuring a prayer. By midday, whispers of witchcraft had spread from the great hall to the chapel, where priests shook their heads gravely over their breviaries. "Such unnatural influence over a nobleman," Brother Thomas declared to his fellow clergy. "We must watch this widow carefully." Meanwhile, at Nellis's cottage, a different sort of poison was being spread. Her brother Dietrich slouched in her best chair, his once fine coat showing signs of wear, his eyes never quite meeting hers as he spoke of family duty. "Dear sister," he said, helping himself to bread and cheese from her table, "these rumors worry me greatly. Perhaps it would be safer if I kept father's deed among my papers?" He tried to smile reassuringly, but his fingers drummed restlessly against his leg. "Just until this talk dies down." Anneliese stood by her hearth, shoulders straight despite her weariness. "The deed stays where it is, brother. I have not forgotten your gambling debts. You wow me." Dietrich pressed a hand to his chest, but his eyes darted to the hearthstone where she had hidden the papers. "I seek only to protect you. These whispers of witchcraft are as false as your concern," Anneliese cut in quietly. "Good day, brother." Dietrich's face hardened as he rose. "You may regret this stubborn pride, sister." He left without a proper farewell, the door slamming behind him as evening drew its purple shadows across the land. Sir Matthias arrived at her door, his noble features grave. Anneliese admitted him quickly, noting how he checked the street before entering. "The Baroness spreads poison with a gilded tongue," he said without preamble. "You must be more careful now." Anneliese's hands twisted in her apron. "I have done nothing wrong." "Truth matters little when witchcraft is whispered." Matthias stepped closer, his voice urgent. "I have seen innocent women condemned on less evidence than kindness to children and a nobleman's regard." His hand moved as if to touch her shoulder, then fell back. "The church itself begins to listen to these tales." "Should I turn the hungry children away?" Anneliese asked softly. "Stop keeping my accounts? Become the worthless widow they always claimed?" "No," Matthias replied firmly. "But we must proceed with greater caution. Your brother's visit troubles me as well. He was seen leaving the Baron's keep yesterday." When Matthias finally departed, Anneliese lit a single candle and knelt beside her bed. The flame's glow caught the tears on her cheeks as she whispered her prayers. "Lord, grant me strength," she murmured, clasping her worn rosary. "Let me endure these trials with dignity." Her shoulders shook as she thought of her brother's betrayal, the Baroness's cruel whispers, and the growing danger gathering like storm clouds above her humble life. The candle guttered in a draught, casting moving shadows on the wall. Outside her window, the mill wheel creaked its steady rhythm, a sound that had once meant security, but now seemed to mark the turning of fate against her. Still, she remained on her knees, praying for the courage to face whatever dawn might bring. The morning sun rose golden over the village square as excitement filled the air. Young maidens wove bright ribbons through leafy garlands, while strong-armed men hauled logs for the evening's bonfires. Children darted between market stalls with armfuls of wildflowers, their laughter mixing with the cheerful tune of pipes and drums being tested for the festivities. As the morning wore on, fine carriages began arriving from the countryside estates. Ladies in silk gowns descended gracefully, their jewels glinting in the summer light. Gentlemen in embroidered coats helped them down, boots clicking on the cobblestones. The village square transformed into a swirl of color and pageantry. Annalise stood in her cottage, smoothing her plain brown wool dress with trembling hands. She had darned it carefully and added a touch of lace at the collar, her one concession to vanity. Still, she knew it would look dreadfully common among the fine clothes of the gentry. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, touching the small silver cross at her throat. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out into the bright afternoon dawn. As she made her way through the crowd, the familiar whispers followed. "The widow thinks herself a lady now," sneered a merchant's wife. "Above her station, that one," muttered another. A group of young women tittered behind their fans as she passed, but then Sir Matthias appeared, resplendent in deep blue velvet, his sword gleaming at his hip. Without hesitation, he strode directly to where Annalise stood trying to make herself invisible near the baker's stall. "Frau Bauer," he said, bowing low before her, "would you honor me with this dance?" The musicians had just struck up a lively tune. All around them, conversation hushed as nobles and villagers alike turned to stare. Annalise's heart hammered in her chest. "Sir, I cannot dance as the gentry do," she protested softly. "Then I shall lead you," he smiled, offering his hand. "Trust me." With another moment's hesitation, she placed her work-roughened hand in his. He drew her into the center of the square where other couples were gathering. As they took their places, Annalise heard the shocked murmurs rippling through the crowd. But when the music began in earnest, Matthias swept her into the dance with such confidence that she forgot everything else. His strong hands guided her surely through the steps, making up for her lack of training with his own grace. Soon she found herself smiling, caught up in the joy of movement. "You dance beautifully," he said loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Truly, you are the most gracious lady of my heart." Color rose in Annalise's cheeks, but for once it was not from shame. As they turned about the square, she saw some of the village women watching with softening expressions. Old Hans the cooper was nodding approvingly. Even a few of the noble ladies seemed to be hiding smiles behind their fans. For one shining hour, Annalise felt what it was to be admired rather than scorned. The afternoon sun turned golden, casting long shadows as couples whirled and laughed. Torches were lit around the square, their flames dancing like stars come down to earth. But as darkness gathered, a harsh voice cut through the music. "Seize her!" The Baron's guards burst through the crowd, their metal-studded leather armor gleaming in the torchlight. Before anyone could react, they grabbed Annalise roughly by the arms. "Frau Annalise Bauer," called the Baron's steward, unrolling a scroll. "You stand accused of witchcraft and the forgery of land deeds." "No!" Matthias shouted, drawing his sword. But more guards surrounded him, pinning his arms. The Baron himself stepped forward, his face stern in the flickering light. "Sir Matthias von Falkenhayn, you have forgotten your noble duties, consorting with a criminal. I strip you of your knighthood and your sword." The crowd watched in horror as the guards wrenched Matthias' blade from his grasp. Annalise struggled against her captors, tears streaming down her face as she watched them force the proud knight to his knees. The music had died. The dancing. Couples stood frozen. In the torchlit square, nobles and villagers alike stared in shock as the guards dragged Annalise and Matthias away, their joyous midsummer celebration shattered by treachery and fear. Dawn crept through the narrow window of the castle dungeon, casting weak rays across the damp stone floor. Frau Anneliese Bauer huddled on a thin pile of moldy straw, her plain dress wrinkled and soiled from the filthy cell. Dark shadows hung beneath her eyes, testament to a sleepless night spent listening to rats scuttling in the corners. The vermin seemed bolder now, creeping closer as hunger made them brave, their tiny claws scratching against the stones. The sound of approaching footsteps made her straighten her back, trying to maintain some dignity despite her circumstances. Keys rattled, and the door at the end of the corridor creaked open. It was Hans, the younger jailer who had shown her small kindnesses since her arrest. A cup of clean water, an extra candle. "Brought you some bread, Frau Bauer," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. And ... "There's something you should know." He hesitated, twisting his cap between weathered hands. "What is it, Hans?" Anneliese asked softly, her throat dry from the dungeon's musty air. The jailer's face creased with genuine regret. "It was your brother, Frau Dietrich. He's the one who told the Baron about the deed." Hans swallowed hard before continuing. "He sold the information for 30 silver marks to clear his gambling debts. I heard it myself, him boasting in the tavern last night." Anneliese closed her eyes, pain lancing through her heart. Her own brother, selling her to ruin for a handful of coins. She had known of his weakness for dice and cards, had even helped him clear his debts before. But this betrayal cut deeper than any blade. "Thank you for telling me," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Throughout the day, she heard familiar footsteps passing by the dungeon entrance booths she would know anywhere. Sir Matthias, stripped of his knightly status but not. His determination had been trying to gain entry since dawn. She could hear fragments of his arguments with the guards, his voice growing more desperate with each attempt. "Please, just 5 minutes. I fought beside your brothers in the war... I give you my word of honor... The guards remained unmoved, their replies curt and dismissive. After all, what worth was the word of a disgraced knight? As night fell and the torches were lit, different voices echoed down the corridor whispers. The clink of coins, a muttered agreement. Then silence, followed by careful footsteps descending the worn stone stairs. Matthias appeared before her cell, his proud bearing unchanged despite his simple clothing. Gone were his polished armor and sword, replaced by a commoner's rough wool jacket. Yet his eyes still held the same warmth when they met hers through the iron bars. "Anneliese," he breathed, reaching through to grasp her cold hands in his warm ones. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you better." "No," she said firmly, though tears threatened to fall. "You risked everything for me already. Your title, your position, all lost because of me." "None of that matters," Matthias insisted, his grip tightening on her fingers. "I will not abandon you to these false charges. I've sent word to friends in the capital, men who owe me favors from the campaigns. We'll prove your innocence." Anneliese shook her head, a tear finally escaping to roll down her cheek. "Save yourself, Matthias, please. They've already decided my fate. Don't throw away whatever chance you have left to rebuild your life." "My life would be worth nothing if I forsook you now," he declared, pressing her hands to his heart. "I swear by all I hold sacred, I will find a way to free you." The guard's warning cough echoed from above, signaling that Matthias' borrowed time was ending. He reluctantly released her hands, his eyes never leaving her face. "Keep faith," he whispered. "I will return." After his footsteps faded into the night, Anneliese sank to her knees beside the single guttering candle. Her prayers rose like smoke in the darkness, not for herself, but for the man who refused to abandon her, despite all cost. The flame flickered once, twice, then died, leaving her alone in the absolute darkness of her cell. Through the misty morning air, Sir Matthias von Falkenhayn urged his horse along the winding path to St. Benedict's Monastery. His mount's hooves kicked up small stones as they climbed the gentle slope toward the ancient stone buildings. The early light caught the dew on sprawling grape arbors that lined the monastery walls, their vines testament to generations of patient cultivation. Matthias' heart pounded with desperate hope. He remembered Annalise mentioning how her late husband had dealt fairly with the monks, supplying grain for their brewery. Perhaps here, among these quiet men of God, lay the key to her salvation. The monastery bells tolled prime as Matthias dismounted in the courtyard. Brown-robed brothers paused in their morning tasks to observe the travel-worn knight. His polished armor was dulled with road dust, his eyes haunted with urgent purpose. "I must speak with the abbot," Matthias declared. To the porter, "A woman's life hangs in the balance." The porter, Brother Thomas, led him through cool stone corridors to the abbot's study. Ancient tapestries lined the walls, their faded scenes depicting saints and martyrs. The abbot, Father Johannes, looked up from his manuscripts with keen eyes set in a weathered face. "Your Grace," Matthias bowed deeply. "I come seeking aid for Frau Annalise Bauer. She lies imprisoned on false charges, while powerful men scheme to steal her lands." The abbot's expression softened at the name. "Ah, the miller's widow. Her husband was a generous soul. Many poor families survived the famine of 12 years past through his charity." "Then you remember him?" Matthias leaned forward eagerly. "Indeed. He gave us grain for bread when our own stores ran low." Father Johannes rose from his desk. "Come, our archives may hold what you seek." They descended to the monastery's library, where Brother Marcus, the ancient archivist, guided them through towering shelves of leather-bound records. Dust motes danced in shafts of light from high windows as they searched. "Here," Brother Marcus whispered after what seemed like hours. His gnarled fingers drew forth a yellowed packet. "The deed to the Bauer lands, recorded in our rolls when the original was drafted. See the ecclesiastical seals? None can question their truth." Matthias' hands trembled as he examined the document. The red wax seals remained clear and unbroken, the writing precise. Here was proof that could not be denied. "There is more," Brother Marcus added. He shuffled through more pages, producing a ledger. Records of Master Bauer's donations during the Great Famine. 20 sacks of grain to our brewery, that we might feed the hungry. 30 more distributed among the poorest families. Such charity speaks to the family's character, the abbot nodded. No witch would give so freely to God's children. Matthias felt hope surge in his chest. "Will you testify to this? Will you speak before the Baron of her husband's virtue?" "We will do more than speak," Father Johannes declared. "We will provide written testimony, sealed with the authority of the Church. Brother Marcus, prepare the documents, and Brother Thomas shall accompany us to bear witness." While the monks worked, Matthias paced the library's worn stone floor. Each moment brought Annalise closer to judgment. Yet he forced himself to wait as Brother Marcus carefully copied the records and applied the monastery's seal dot as the sum began its descent, painting the library windows in amber light. The abbot presented Matthias with a leather folio containing the precious documents. "Go with God's speed," he blessed the knight. "Truth and justice must prevail." Matthias' throat tightened with emotion. He made his way to the monastery's small chapel, the vaulted ceiling arching overhead like protective wings. Kneeling before the altar, he pressed his forehead to his clasped hands. "She shall not be lost to lies," he vowed, his whispered words echoing in the sacred space. The dying sunlight streamed through stained glass, bathing him in colors like heaven's blessing. On his mission. In his heart, he knew tomorrow would decide all. Annelise's fate, his own future, and whether justice could triumph over power in their corner of the world. The town square buzzed with tension as the Duke's gilded carriage rolled through the cobblestone streets. Nobles in their finest silks and velvets lined the way, bowing deeply as their sovereign passed. The Baron Heinrich stood at the courthouse steps, his smile oily with false confidence as he adjusted his elaborate coat. Inside the courthouse, the aged wooden benches creaked under the weight of gathered courtiers. Sunlight streamed through high windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air. The Duke, a commanding figure in deep blue velvet trimmed with silver, took his seat on the raised platform. His stern gaze swept across the assembled crowd, settling briefly on the Baron's smug expression. "Bring forth the accused," the Duke commanded, his voice cutting through the whispers. The heavy door scraped open. 2 guards dragged Annalise forward, chains rattling at her wrists. Her plain dress was wrinkled from the dungeon, her face pale but dignified. She kept her eyes downcast, avoiding the stares of those who had once been her neighbors. The Baron stepped forward with a flourish. "Your Grace, this woman stands accused of most grievous crimes. Not only has she forged documents claiming rights to valuable lands, but she has also practiced witchcraft to bewitch a noble knight." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Duke's expression remained impassive as the Baron continued his accusations. Spinning tales of peasant cunning and dark arts. Suddenly, the courthouse door burst open. Sir Matthias strode in, travel-stained but resolute. In his hands he carried a leather document case bearing the monastery's seal. "Your Grace, I beg leave to speak." The Duke raised an eyebrow, but nodded his permission. Annelise's head lifted slightly, hope warring with fear in her eyes. Matthias approached the platform, bowing deeply. "My Lord Duke, I bring proof of Frau Bauer's innocence." He opened the case, producing the monastery's deed. This document, bearing the abbey's seal, proves her rightful ownership of the contested lands. Moreover, I have brought Brother Thomas, who can testify to the character of the Bauer family. The elderly monk stepped forward, his brown robes rustling. "Indeed, Your Grace, during the Great Famine 2 winters past, it was Heinrich Bauer who provided grain to feed the poor, asking nothing in return. His widow has maintained that same generous spirit." The Duke examined the deed carefully, then turned his penetrating gaze upon the Baron. "It seems, Baron Heinrich, that you have plotted to steal from a widow through false accusations. This deed is genuine, and your crimes are grave." The Baron's face turned ashen. "But Your Grace, surely you cannot take the word of a common woman over—" "Silence." The Duke rose to his feet. "I find no evidence of witchcraft, only of your own greed and malice." Sir Matthias stepped forward. Matthias approached and knelt before the Duke. "You chose honor over ease, truth over position. I restore your knighthood and commend your loyalty." The Duke turned to Annalise, who trembled with disbelief. "Frau Bauer, you are cleared of all charges. Furthermore, I confirm you as rightful mistress of these lands, with all rights and privileges thereof." The chains were removed from Annalise's wrists. She stood straighter, dignity returning to her bearing, though tears shone in her eyes. Then Matthias turned to her, dropping to one knee. The courthouse fell silent, watching this unprecedented scene. A knight kneeling before a miller's widow. "Frau Annalise Bauer," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "I kneel before you not from pity, but from love. These weeks at your side have shown me your true worth, your kindness, your strength, your grace in the face of cruelty. I ask for your hand in marriage, if you will have me." Annalise stood frozen, one hand pressed to her heart as the courtroom held its breath. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing them both in its warm glow as they waited for her answer. The church bells of St. Michael's rang joyously across the town square on a bright autumn morning. Their pealing echoed through narrow streets where villagers gathered in their Sunday best. craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the remarkable wedding about to unfold. 3 weeks had passed since the banns were first read, each Sunday announcement, drawing larger crowds of curious onlookers. "Who would have thought," whispered a baker's wife to her neighbor, "a Frau Bauer marrying a knight?" The church doors stood open wide, welcoming sunshine and the sweet fragrance of late roses. Inside, nobles shifted uncomfortably in their pews, their silk rustling as they whispered behind jeweled fans. Yet the front rows brimmed with beaming faces the poor families Anneliese had fed, the children she'd sneaked extra bread, the elderly she'd tended in illness. When Anneliese appeared in the doorway, a collective gasp rose from the congregation. She wore a gown of cream-colored wool, simple in cut but impeccably tailored, with tiny pearls sewn at the collar and cuffs. Her gray-streaked hair was neatly braided with white ribbons, and she carried a bouquet of late autumn flowers tied with a blue ribbon. "She looks like a proper lady," murmured one of the serving girls who'd often mocked her. Who knew? At the altar, Sir Matthias von Falkenhayn stood tall in his restored knight's regalia, his sword gleaming at his hip. His eyes never left Anneliese as she walked down the aisle, her step steady despite the hundreds of eyes upon her. The Duke himself sat in a place of honor, his presence ensuring none could question the legitimacy of this unconventional match. The priest raised his hands for silence, and his voice rang clear through the hushed church. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today, ... When it came time for the vows, Matthias spoke with the resonant authority of a knight making a sacred oath. "I, Sir Matthias von Falkenhayn, take thee, Anneliese Bauer, to be my wedded wife. I pledge not only my love and fidelity, but my protection of your rights and properties, to manage them in your name with honor and wisdom." Anneliese's voice trembled slightly, but grew stronger with each word. "I, Anneliese Bauer, take thee, Sir Matthias von Falkenhayn, to be my wedded husband. I pledge my love, my trust, and my partnership in all things." The Duke rose then, his voice carrying through the church. "Let it be known that by our sovereign decree, the lands and rights of Frau Bauer shall remain her own, though she becomes Lady Falkenhayn. Her husband shall manage them in her name, but they shall pass to her heirs as she sees fit." A murmur rippled through the nobles. Such an arrangement was nearly unheard of. Yet none dared protest with the Duke himself, proclaiming it. As the priest pronounced them man and wife, Matthias kissed his bride with tender reverence. The common folk burst into cheerful applause, while the nobles offered polite, if restrained, congratulations. That evening their new home blazed with warmth and welcome. Candles flickered in every window of the modest but well-kept house, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen, where Anneliese had insisted on baking wedding bread herself. Children darted between tables set up in the garden, their plates heaped with feast day treats, while their parents blessed the new couple's generosity. Anneliese stood in her kitchen doorway, watching the scene with quiet joy. Her new title of Lady Falkenhayn sat strange, but not unwelcome upon her shoulders. More precious than the title was the respect she saw in people's eyes. Not fearful deference to rank, but genuine appreciation for her kindness and strength. Matthias appeared beside her, his hand warm upon her shoulder. "Are you happy, my love?" She looked up at him, then out at their gathered guests, noble and common alike, breaking bread together at her tables. No whispers, no mockery, only celebration and good wishes. "Yes," she said softly, "more than I ever dreamed possible." The candlelight caught the silver in her hair, turning it to a crown more elegant than any noble's tiara. In that moment, she stood tall and proud, every inch a lady, not because of her new title, but because of the quiet dignity that had been within her all along. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.